Goldman Sachs and Bank of America combined manage $5.7 trillion worth of capital, and they're both wrong about what happens next. The market is pricing in zero interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve in 2026. This is a mispricing, and the window to position yourself is closing. The proof isn't buried in some obscure data set, it's hiding in plain sight. In 5 policy moves this administration has already made: Doge, tariffs, the AI executive order, the Clarity Act, and the U.S. Treasury shift towards short term paper. On the surface, these look unrelated, but zoom out and they're all pointing at the same thing: a coordinated attempt to address the United States' $39 trillion worth of debt. Kevin Warsh, as the new Fed chair, is the final piece of the puzzle. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact playbook Warsh is going to run and what assets you need to own before the market figures out what Goldman and Bank of America are missing. The playbook is going to work out very well for those who see it coming, and it will be quietly devastating for those who don't. I'm Mitchell Askew, head analyst at Blockware, the leading Bitcoin mining firm in the world. I've spent my entire career at the intersection of Bitcoin and global macro, and I'm here to give you analysis that you can understand and take action on. The debt. This is the key to understanding everything. Our entire monetary system is built around debt, and the most powerful institution in the world, the United States government, cannot run from that fact. Every decision that this administration has made has been with this debt in mind. The problem is that the debt is spiraling out of control. 2025 set a new record. 19% of the entire federal budget was spent servicing interest. Yes, not even paying down the debt, just paying the interest. This was more money spent on interest alone than the entire US military. And that's precisely why interest rate policy is so crucial. The lower the interest rates go, the less interest the United States has to pay on their debt. And every move they're making is an attempt to get rates down. And that's why this Fed chair appointment is the most important decision Trump will make during his entire 4-year term. Now, the Fed is not the only factor that can influence interest rates. They are the most important factor, but they're not the only one. And throughout the past 15 months, we've seen this administration try to get interest rates down and address the debt through other mechanisms. Unfortunately, none of these have quite done the job. The first of these was Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, and it was all hyped up when this thing was launched, but unfortunately, the job it set out to do, which was to cut government spending, was not accomplished, right? The United States is continuing to run a $1 trillion budget deficit every single year. But the idea in theory was if you can cut spending, then you can run a surplus and pay down the debt that way. Cut spending, reduce the deficit, reduce how many treasuries the United States has to issue into the market, and interest rates will fall accordingly. But cutting spending alone is not enough. They needed to increase revenue. That's where the tariffs come into play. In theory, the tariffs would generate revenue as a tax on imported goods into the United States. However, the actual amount of revenue they generated from this was around $30 billion annually, and that's marginal compared to the $1 trillion deficit and the $6 trillion annual budget. But the real reason for the tariff, and this is what everyone is missing, was not to generate revenue, it was to spook the treasury market. Treasuries are bought during times of uncertainty, historically. At least that's what your textbook would tell you and your finance professor would tell you. But it's not exactly how things have been playing out. However, this was unbeknownst to the administration at the time. The idea was if we levy these tariffs, then there will be mass uncertainty in the global economy. And what have people historically done when things are uncertain? They buy treasuries. And they did initially, but treasuries soon sold off, and interest rates were actually higher 1 month after the tariffs than they were in the immediate aftermath. Move number 3 to address the debt has to do with the Treasury policy, and pay close attention because what the current administration is doing is actually a page from the previous administration's playbook. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has followed in the footsteps of his predecessor Janet Yellen in that he is heavily relying on short-term debt to finance the US government. For those that don't know, the Treasury is responsible for all of the spending that goes on at the federal level. And since there is this massive budget deficit, they have to issue debt into the market to pay for all of the things that the government spends money on. And rather than borrowing on 5, 10, 20, and 30-year treasury notes, which would lock in high interest rates for 5, 10, 20, or 30 years, Scott Bessent has been heavily reliant on short term debt, treasury bills, 3 month, 6 month, 1 year, 2 year notes. And this was exactly what the previous administration was doing. The idea is if you can kind of skate by now on the short term debt, hopefully interest rates will come down in the near to medium term. And then when you go to refinance the newly issued debt, you can do so at a lower rate for a longer term. And about 90% of the debt issued by the Treasury in 2024 was 2 years or less, which means all of that is up for refinancing this year or sooner. And Scott Bessent has been doing the exact same thing. So the problem is just being kicked down the road little by little. It's not being addressed in any meaningful capacity. Now, what this does is it provides a bit of short term relief on long term interest rates. The less supply of 10-year treasuries that they issue into the market means rates can stay relatively low, lower than they otherwise would be. But the fact that the 10-year rate is still over 4.5% and they're hardly issuing any new 10-year notes is very telling. And it's not a good sign for the US government. If what I'm saying makes sense to you, comment Warsh down below. I read every comment. Move number 4 may come as a surprise, but if you're a Bitcoiner, you probably already understand the implications. Clarity Act and the push towards stablecoins. What could this have to do with the US debt? Well, stablecoin issuers like Tether are quickly rising the ranks in terms of US Treasury holders. What they do is quite simple. They issue digital dollars to the world on a blockchain. People buy those dollars, and then they take that money and buy treasury bills to back up those dollars. And so the Clarity Act is not really anything to do with Bitcoin, although it is touted significantly in the Bitcoin community. It has almost everything to do with stablecoins. It is a bill designed to support this stablecoin infrastructure. And the reason being, stablecoins tap into a new market for US dollars and US debt. Third world countries, places where it's difficult to get a bank account, difficult to have access to dollars, they love stablecoins. And these are previously dormant pools of capital that weren't supporting the treasury market. And so by providing infrastructure and guardrails for stablecoin issuers, the government will now be able to tap into these other markets, providing more support for the dollar and more support for US treasuries. Again, all 4 of these moves have pointed in the same direction, an attempt to keep rates down and address the debt. And move number 5 is no different, although the implications are far more extreme. Move number 5 is this AI executive order and the overall push by this administration to support artificial intelligence data centers and the entire infrastructure build out. Now, I'm a huge fan of artificial intelligence. I think it's very important that young people specifically learn how to use these tools and maximize your skill set as an individual using the resources available to you. Now, the reason this administration is pushing so heavily towards AI is because it's kind of the Hail Mary attempt at managing the debt. You can cut spending, you can try to raise revenue, you can try to shake up the market into organically buying US treasuries and getting rates down. But even when you put all this together, we're not seeing the 10-year rate come down. It's still over 4.5%. And so what they need is an increase in productivity. If you can raise the productivity in the economy, increase GDP, that's going to lead to higher tax revenues for the government, which could allow them to pay down the debt. But there's one huge problem, and Kevin Warsh actually understands what it is. The problem is this: technology is a deflationary force on prices. This is a problem when you have $39 trillion in debt. Under a sound monetary system, if you can imagine a world with a finite amount of monetary units, an increase in our technology as a species would allow prices to come down. We would become more effective at producing goods and services, fewer input costs, and prices would fall accordingly. But when you have an inflationary monetary system, you can't have this, right? Because the entire system is built on debt. If prices come down, tax rev if prices come down, tax revenue will shrink and it will be harder to pay back the debt. People who owe money are going to have a harder time paying that money back. And so the weird paradox is that AI is going to be this massive deflationary force. It's going to increase our productivity. It's going to be really good for the economy, but it's going to be really bad for the United States and their $39 trillion debt problem. And so what they have to do is they have to offset these productivity gains with, you guessed it, monetary debasement, QE, artificially lowering interest rates and increasing the money supply so that you continue to get inflation, prices continue to go up over time, counteracting the increase in productivity and the deflationary force caused by artificial intelligence. And this is what leads us to Kevin Warsh. He understands all of the dynamics at play. He was handpicked by this president to serve as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Kevin Warsh has gone on record and actually commented on this very phenomenon that technology and AI are a deflationary force. He understands the implications and how high the stakes are. But the market is currently pricing him in as a hawk. They think he's going to keep rates where they're at and maybe actually increase them. But the market is missing this important key piece, and it is the AI deflationary impact. This, combined with the $39 trillion worth of debt, are unstoppable structural forces that are going to force Kevin Warsh to lower interest rates, and ideally sooner rather than later. Now, unfortunately, for those that don't hold assets, they're going to get left behind. Our bifurcated economy, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, is by design. And this is what inflation does: it drives asset prices higher and it steals value from those who don't hold assets, who simply save in the currency. So don't find yourself on the wrong side of the line here. Make sure you're stacking hard assets and don't be caught off guard when the market begins to price in the inevitability of interest rate cuts. If you found this video, make sure to, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.